The forest doesn't stop screaming. Corporal Tommy Hale is face down in frozen mud, and the mud is the only warm thing left in the world. 11 degrees. Wet wool against his ribs. The taste of blood and pine bark in his mouth. Somewhere behind him, 40 feet of open ground he already crossed once and cannot cross again. Somewhere ahead of him, a pillbox with 3 firing slots and a concrete roof 4 feet thick. A pillbox the U.S. Army engineers rated as unreducible by infantry alone. He is alone. Not alone like a man waiting for backup. Alone like the last name on a roster nobody is reading anymore. 1 hour ago, Hale had 22 men around him. Now there is the sound of the forest, the whine of tree bursts overhead, wood splinters falling like rain, and underneath it, low and mechanical, the traversing of an MG-42 searching the ground for him at a cyclic rate that turns single men into red mist in under 2 seconds. He counts 3 firing slots. He counts by the muzzle flashes alone, at least 10 German riflemen dug in around the bunker's flanks, a spotter network built to make sure nothing living reaches that concrete. He has 1 M1 Garand, 11 rounds left, 1 grenade, and a promise he made to a girl in Akron, Ohio, folded twice in his breast pocket. The bunker has held this ridge for 3 months. It has broken 2 previous assaults. The men who tried before him are still out there, in the wire, in the mud, not moving. New orders came through on the radio 9 minutes ago. He hasn't opened them yet. He doesn't know it, but in the next 90 seconds, a decision is coming that will make no sense to anyone who hears about it afterward, until they understand exactly what he had already seen and what he was about to do about it. Right now, all he can do is breathe into the mud and wait for the gun to look somewhere else. Before the forest, before the concrete and the wire, Tommy Hale was 22 years old and smelled permanently of rubber and machine oil. He grew up on Excelsior Avenue in Akron, Ohio, 3 blocks from the Goodyear plant where his father worked the tire building line for 19 years. Tommy worked it too, for 11 months, before Pearl Harbor made the decision for him that he'd been circling anyway. He enlisted in February 1942, the week he turned 20. He wasn't the biggest man in his company. He wasn't the loudest. What the men of Company G, 112th Infantry Regiment, 28th Infantry Division remembered about him was patience, an almost unnatural stillness. In training at Camp Gordon, his squad leader used to say Hale could lie in a ditch so long you'd forget he was human and start thinking he was part of the ground. It made him a natural at what the Army called reconnaissance by fire, and what the men in his platoon just called sending Hale up first. They called him Quiet Tom. Not because he didn't talk, he talked plenty about the Indians' pennant chances, about his kid sister's letters, about a girl named Ruth Anders who worked the switchboard at the Goodyear office and who he'd walked home 4 times before he shipped out. Before he left, Ruth gave him a photograph of herself standing in front of her parents' porch, laughing at something out of frame. On the back she'd written, "Come back and tell me the joke." He never asked what the joke was. He never got the chance. He folded the photograph into his breast pocket. Behind the letter he hadn't finished writing back, and it had been there through Normandy's hedgerows, through the retreat and retake of Wassenack, and now through the black fir trees of the Huichin. He was a good soldier because he was patient. He was about to become something else entirely, because patience was about to run out of road. The objective was simple on paper: a single fortified pillbox, designated by regimental intelligence as Bunker 4, anchoring the German line on a wooded ridge above the Call Trail, the same brutal supply route that had already swallowed a battalion's worth of American armor and men in the fighting for Schmidt. Intelligence briefed it as a secondary position: 6 to 8 defenders, light automatic weapons, a mop-up objective to secure the flank before the regiment's main push. That briefing was wrong in almost every particular, and the men of Company G would pay for it inside the first 10 minutes. Bunker 4 was not a secondary position. It was the forward anchor of a reinforced platoon from a Volksgrenadier regiment that had spent 3 months digging into the West Wall's pre-war concrete emplacements. Bunkers built in the 1930s, designed by German army engineers to withstand direct artillery hits. 4 feet of reinforced concrete with interlocking fields of fire. Where intelligence promised 6 to 8 men, aerial photographs later confirmed at least 30 defenders in supporting trenches and spider holes, with 2 additional MG-42 positions cited specifically to cover the exact approach Company G had been assigned to use. The safe route through the tree line cleared, according to intelligence, by an engineer patrol 2 nights earlier, had been remined. The Germans had spent those same 2 nights laying a fresh belt of shoe mines under the frost, and had pulled back their outer listening posts specifically to let an American patrol walk the ground undisturbed and report it clear. Hale's platoon crossed the open ground at 6:40. By 6:51, the platoon leader was dead, the platoon sergeant was down with a shattered femur, and 11 of 22 men were casualties, cut down not by a scattered defense, but by a kill zone that had been planned, ranged, and waiting for exactly this axis of attack. At 7:13, as the survivors tried to reorganize in a shell crater 60 yards short of the wire, the radio crackled with new orders from battalion. The main effort had shifted 2 miles north. Company G was to disengage, consolidate, and withdraw to the previous night's position. The attack on Bunker 4 was called off. The order reached the men in the crater. It reached the acting NCO, a corporal with 2 years less time in the company than Hale, who gave the order to pull back. 6 men began the withdrawal under covering fire. Hale did not hear the order clearly. What he heard was static, his own name, and the words "cover" and 12 o'clock. And by the time he understood the rest, the covering fire he needed to fall back through had already stopped, because the men providing it were already 50 yards gone. He was cut off. No radio contact he could trust. No ammunition resupply. He counted what he had left, and it came to 11 rounds for the Garand, 1 grenade, and a canteen a third full. His left forearm was creased by a rifle round he hadn't fully registered taking, blood soaking into his sleeve and freezing there in the cold. 1 U.S. Army soldier, 1 uncaptured position, still designated on the map as an active objective nobody had told him to abandon. The mission was still active. He was the only man left who didn't know it was supposed to be over. He moves before he decides to move, the way trained men do when thinking would only slow them down. 40 yards of open ground between the crater and the tree line. Hale goes low and fast, Garand across his forearms, and the forest answers him instantly. This is not a panicked defense. This is a machine doing exactly what it was built to do. The lead MG-42 opens up from the bunker's left embrasure, its rate of fire so fast it doesn't sound like individual shots. It sounds like fabric tearing, a sound American soldiers had already learned to call Hitler's zipper. A second gun answers from a flanking position Hale can't see, interlocking its fire with the first so that there is no angle of approach that isn't covered by at least one weapon at all times. Behind the guns, a voice, steady, unhurried, giving fire corrections in short, clipped German. This is not a green unit. This is a defense commanded by a man who has done this before, who has broken assaults on this exact stretch of ground twice already this month, and who directs his riflemen's fire the way a conductor directs an orchestra, controlled bursts, ammunition discipline, no wasted rounds, no wasted motion. Hale drops into a depression as rounds stitch the tree 6 inches above his head, bark exploding into his face. He can see it now clearly for the first time, the bunker's concrete face, gray and immovable, 3 firing slots each with a rifleman's silhouette moving behind it, and dug in around its flanks, spider holes with riflemen positioned specifically to shoot anything that tries to work around the sides. 10 men, minimum, purely in the outer ring. This position was built to make a single man's death a formality. He cannot win this. Then the ground 3 feet to his left erupts. It is not the bunker. It is a flanking position he never saw, a camouflaged spider hole dug behind a fallen log, invisible until the muzzle flash gives it away. And the German inside it has waited patiently for Hale to commit to cover that put him directly in this hole's field of fire. It is a kill zone within the kill zone. Death in the next half second is not a possibility. It is a certainty. Hale doesn't think. His body remembers 11 months of training before his mind catches up. He rolls hard right, into the exact ground the ambusher wasn't covering because no sane man rolls toward more open exposure, and comes up firing from one knee 3 rounds, the German's head snapping back before the man completes his second shot. Hale is down to 8 rounds. His ears are ringing. His hands, when he looks at them, will not stop shaking, and he presses them flat against the frozen dirt just to make them still. What he does in the next 90 seconds makes no tactical sense at all. He does not fall back. He does not seek better cover. He turns and begins crawling not away from the bunker, but toward its blind side, along a line of dead ground that shouldn't exist on this slope. Until you understand what he saw in that spider hole's construction, what it told him about the ground he was standing on, none of what happens next will make sense either. The dead ground is real, a drainage cut, maybe 18 inches deep, snaking along the contour of the ridge, invisible from the bunker's firing slots because the slots were built to cover the open approach, not the terrain behind a shoulder of rock. Hale follows it on his stomach, elbows and knees, the cut so shallow in places that he has to flatten himself into the mud like something being poured rather than something walking. It costs him time. It costs him skin off both elbows. It buys him 40 yards he shouldn't have. A rifleman in a foxhole above the cut hears him, a boot scrape, a breath too loud, and swings around. Hale doesn't have an angle for the Garand. He does have the grenade. He pulls the pin with his teeth, a 4-second count he's practiced 100 times and never trusted until now, and rolls it up and over the lip of the foxhole. The German has time to see it land. He does not have time to do anything else. One rifle position silenced. Hale is down to 7 rounds and no grenades. Inside the bunker, something has changed, and Hale can hear it even through the concrete. The voice that was giving calm fire corrections has an edge in it now. Why veal send ease? How many are there? A runner breaks from the trench line toward the rear, sent to find out why the flanking position has gone silent, why the eastern foxhole isn't answering radio checks. The German platoon commander, a Feldwebel named Brandt who has held this ridge since September and never once lost it, does the arithmetic every professional soldier does under pressure, and the arithmetic doesn't work. 2 positions down. No sound of a coordinated assault, no artillery prep, no covering fire pattern that would indicate more than 1 rifle. He has been trained for a company attack. What is happening to his flank looks like nothing in his training at all. Hale reaches a fold in the ground 40 feet from the bunker's rear wall, and that is when he sees them. A family. 3 of them pressed into a root cellar dug into the hillside behind the bunker. A woman, an old man, and a girl who cannot be older than 9, her coat too thin for the cold, holding a small tin cup like it's the only possession she managed to keep. German civilians, sheltering directly behind the position he's about to assault, close enough that his line of fire toward the bunker's rear entrance would cut directly across the cellar mouth. His plan, get behind them, hit the rear door, finish it fast, dies in that instant. He changes his angle. It costs him the direct approach. It costs him almost a full minute of exposure working around the cellar's blind side instead of through it, a minute in which anything could find him. It costs him, 4 steps later, a graze along his outer thigh from a rifleman he never even saw, warm blood immediately going cold against his leg. He does not fire toward the cellar. Not once. Not even when it would have been faster. At the rear of the bunker, instead of assaulting the door, Hale does something that makes no sense. He drops to 1 knee beside the exterior ventilation shaft, a concrete stack barely visible in the underbrush, and instead of trying to force it or grenade it, he simply presses his ear against it and listens. Then he starts pulling handfuls of wet leaf litter and packing them methodically into the shaft's opening. It looks like madness. A man with 7 rounds, wounded twice, spending precious seconds stuffing leaves into a pipe instead of finishing the fight. Nobody watching would understand it. Not yet. He makes it to a fold of dead ground 20 yards out and stops, because his body simply will not go further without a rest it cannot afford to take. The adrenaline that carried him through the crawl, the grenade, the graze along his thigh, it drains out all at once, the way it always does, and what's left underneath is exhaustion so total it feels like drowning. He hasn't slept in over 30 hours. He hasn't eaten since the previous evening. His canteen is down to a mouthful of water gone metallic with cold. His hands won't stop shaking now, and it isn't fear this time. It's his body simply running out of anything left to run on. He thinks he hears Prout's voice, the platoon sergeant, the one with the shattered femur back in the crater, telling him to fall back. Fall back, that's an order, Hale, fall back. He knows Prout isn't there. He answers him anyway, quietly into the dirt. He thinks about the new orders he still hasn't fully read. Withdraw. Consolidate. The mission is over, according to a man 2 miles away who has never seen this ridge. Maybe the sane thing, the only sane thing, was to have gone with the others when the covering fire stopped. Maybe he is not finishing a mission. Maybe he is simply a man too stubborn or too stupid to know when a thing is already lost. He looks back toward the root cellar, toward the girl with the tin cup, and understands with total clarity that she did not ask to be behind that concrete wall any more than he asked to be in front of it. She is not the objective. She was never on any map. But she is, in this moment, the only thing in the entire war that feels like it still has a clean answer. He reaches into his breast pocket, not for ammunition, but for the photograph, and holds it in a hand that will not stop shaking. Come back and tell me the joke. He never asked what the joke was. He realizes now, kneeling in frozen mud 4,000 miles from Excelsior Avenue, that he has spent 2 years assuming there would always be time to ask later. He puts the photograph away. He checks the Garand. 7 rounds. He starts moving again. Inside Bunker 4, the defense that held this ridge for 3 months is coming apart from the inside. Feldwebel Brandt cannot raise the eastern foxhole. He cannot raise the flanking position. A runner sent to investigate has not returned. His men at the firing slots are no longer reporting targets. They are reporting movement, sounds, shapes at the tree line that resolve into nothing when they fire on them. One young rifleman, barely 19, has abandoned his slot twice now to ask his neighbor if there is more than one American out there, because the alternative, that one man has done this, does not fit inside anything he was trained to believe about how battles work. Wo ist Where is he? The question passes down the trench line like a fever. Hale reaches the ventilation shaft he packed with leaves 20 minutes earlier, and understands now what every man in that structure is only beginning to feel. Concrete does not breathe on its own. A bunker built to withstand artillery has to draw air from somewhere for the men and the weapons inside it, and a shaft choked with wet leaf litter starves that air, slowly, then all at once. He hears coughing now, muffled through the concrete. He hears the fire discipline in the firing slots start to fray, bursts fired at nothing, ammunition burning for no target, men who can no longer breathe clearly starting to panic in a structure they believed was their fortress. He moves. 10 meters from the rear entrance. He fires his last 3 rounds at a rifleman stumbling out coughing into the open air, drops the empty Garand and closes the remaining distance with his M1911 in hand. He moved, fired, dropped, moved again, 30 meters, 20, 10. Brandt meets him at the door, the only defender still capable of a clear thought, pistol raised, and in the half-second where both men see each other clearly for the first time, Hale is faster, because Hale has had nothing left to lose since the crater, and men with nothing left to lose move differently than men still calculating what they might survive. The last weapon in Bunker 4 goes silent at 8:47. Behind the position, the root cellar is untouched. The woman, the old man, the girl with the tin cup are exactly where Hale left them, and exactly where his changed approach, the minute he spent, the wound he took working around them instead of through them, kept them. For 1 full second there is no sound at all. Not gunfire, not voices, not whined through the black fir trees. Just breath and smoke drifting out of a ventilation shaft packed with wet leaves, and a single American soldier on his knees in the doorway of a position the U.S. Army had rated unreducible by infantry alone. When elements of Company G reached Bunker 4 4 hours later, expecting to find it still held, they found 7 German dead, 6 wounded and 17 prisoners. A platoon-strength defense reduced by 1 man with a rifle, a pistol, and a handful of wet leaves. They found Corporal Tommy Hale sitting against the bunker's outer wall, empty garand across his knees, the girl from the root cellar asleep against her mother's shoulder 20 feet away, both of them alive because a wounded, exhausted, half-starved American had chosen the longer, harder, more dangerous path around them instead of through. In the days after, several of the captured Germans were questioned separately by an intelligence officer trying to understand how a fortified platoon position had fallen in under 2 hours to what the after-action report would eventually list, with quiet astonishment, as one U.S. soldier, unsupported. The first question every prisoner was asked was some version of, "How many Americans attacked you?" The answers did not agree with each other, and did not agree with the truth. One rifleman insisted it had been at least a squad, working from multiple directions. Another swore there had been an assault team with satchel charges. There had been no charges, only leaves and a knife and a Colt automatic. The interrogating officer, cross-referencing the answers against what the terrain and the evidence actually showed, wrote in his notes that the confusion among the prisoners was total, and that none of them could reconcile what they'd experienced with what had actually happened to them. What the surviving Germans described, more consistently than the numbers, was the feeling of it, a defense that had held for 3 months coming apart not from firepower, but from an enemy they could not locate, could not count, and could not outthink. One wounded rifleman, questioned through an interpreter, said that toward the end his sergeant had stopped giving orders and started simply calling out names into the trench, trying to find out who was still there to answer. Among themselves, in the holding pen, several of the prisoners referred to the man who had taken the position using a phrase the interpreter rendered, imperfectly, as something close to the one who came from the ground. A reference, it seemed, to the drainage cut Hale had used, and to the fact that no one in the bunker had ever clearly seen him arrive. It was not an official designation. It was the kind of name frightened men give to something they cannot otherwise explain. One of them, an older Oberjefrader who had survived the Eastern Front before being transferred west, was asked directly what he thought of the American who had done this. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, through the interpreter, that in 5 years of war he had learned to fear artillery, and to fear aircraft, and to fear a determined company advancing in the open, but that he had never, until that ridge, been made to fear a single man walking alone toward men who outnumbered him 10 to 1 and winning. The woman from the root cellar spoke to an American chaplain 2 days later, in halting English, about the soldier who had fired everywhere except toward her daughter, even when it clearly cost him. She did not know his name. She asked that it be found, so that her daughter, when she was old enough, would know it. Corporal Thomas Hale was recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions on that ridge above the Call Trail. The citation, condensed from the after-action reports and eyewitness statements of the men who reached the position afterward, credits him with single-handedly reducing a fortified enemy platoon position, eliminating or capturing its defenders, and preserving the lives of 3 German civilians sheltering within the objective area. Actions performed. The citation notes, after being separated from his unit, without communication, and under conditions of continuous hostile fire, he came home to Akron in the spring of 1945, to Excelsior Avenue, to a father still working the tire-building line, and to Ruth Anders, who was still working the switchboard at the Goodyear office and who had kept every letter he'd managed to send. He did not talk about the ridge for a long time. When his daughter asked him, years later, why he never told war stories at family gatherings the way some of the other veterans on the street did, he told her simply that some things aren't stories, they're just weight you carry, and you don't hand weight to people who love you. He did eventually tell Ruth about the girl with the tin cup. He never learned her name. He said once that he hoped, wherever she was, she'd grown up somewhere the ground didn't shake anymore. The capture of Bunker 4 opened the flank that allowed the 28th Infantry Division to continue its advance along the ridge. At a cost, division records would later reflect, of far fewer American lives than a second frontal assault would have required. One position, one man, and a line on a map that didn't have to be paid for twice. Asked once what he kept in his breast pocket that whole campaign, Hale would only say it was a photograph, and that he'd finally gotten to ask about the joke. He was given intelligence that was wrong. Orders changed on him at the exact moment he needed them to hold steady. An enemy that had broken 2 previous assaults set a trap built specifically to kill him, and came within a half-second of succeeding. Civilians appeared where no civilians were supposed to be, and he chose the harder path, the slower path, the path that cost him blood, because the mission was never actually the only thing worth protecting. And the men who tried everything they had to stop him, professional soldiers, dug into concrete with every advantage of position and firepower and preparation, could not explain even to each other what had beaten them. So they gave it a name, not because military doctrine required it, because there was nothing else left to call it. If you've worn the uniform, you know this weight. You know it doesn't announce itself with music. It shows up in a shaking hand you press flat against the ground until it's still, and then you keep moving anyway. If you haven't, understand this. Greatness in that forest wasn't a decision made once, in a moment of glory. It was 100 small decisions, to crawl 40 more feet, to go around instead of through, to keep 7 rounds ready instead of firing them out of fear. Made by an ordinary man from a street in Akron who never once thought of himself as extraordinary, and who became exactly that anyway, confirmed not only by the men who sent him in, but by the men who tried hardest to stop him and could not. He came back. He told her the joke. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you never miss these forgotten stories of extraordinary American courage. Who should we tell next? Drop their name in the comments.